Usual reminders, we shall begin. So, good afternoon, members. We have a number of substantive items today. Firstly, there will be a briefing from officials on the Good Relations Indicators consultation process. Then, again, departmental officials, this time on gender equality. The committee will be briefed by officials on the regeneration of former military sites. And finally, we have a written briefing on the Barroso Task Force Desk Officers Progress Report for October to December last. We were to have taken a briefing on the racial equality strategy. However, at 3:30 yesterday afternoon, we received correspondence, which is page 3 of your table pack. This was from the department, advising us the briefing could not go ahead as the draft document is still under consideration and the department will be in touch in the near future to reschedule. On Monday, you will also have received an email from the committee office with a copy of the press release from the department in relation to the announcement of the first 23 projects to be funded through the Social Investment Fund. Now, I requested that officials come to the committee today to give us a briefing. That was not possible. I've been advised that the 26th of February is the earliest we can receive a briefing, and I am given to understand this is because the lead official has a prior engagement next week. My question, members, is, are we the primary stakeholder?
Engagement next week, is the week after?
He's offering the week after next. But my question before we decide is, are we the primary stakeholder?
I would have thought so.
Chair, I suppose we have to be careful around this in case it's a sensitive engagement, that somebody has. Is there nobody else that can deputise for him? So if it is something like of a personal nature, maybe that can be avoided.
Well, it's a professional engagement, Clark, which is...
I understand it's the Victims and Survivors Project Board.
The Victims and Survivors Project Board is having a meeting. I see no reason why a deputy should not attend that meeting. So, members, I think we should say we want our briefing on SIF next Wednesday afternoon. Yep. Okay. Thank you very much.
Go for it. Yep.
Apologies. No apologies received.
Apology from Brenda Hill.
Right.
Sir.
Thank you. Members, last week we considered correspondence from the head of the Civil Service who was seeking an informal meeting. We, if you recall, wanted the head of the Civil Service to come to committee. I think as a compromise we agreed would accede to his request for an informal meeting as a first step.
Okay.
And strictly as a first step to appearing before committee. That has been advanced to the point where it has been scheduled for early on Tuesday the 18th of February. Okay. So I would have hoped it would have been before then, but this is the first available date that suits Deputy Chair, myself and Mr McKibben. So I hope that's, while it's not the best outcome, it's acceptable. Yep. Okay. Page 5, members, there's an invitation to myself as Chair from the Minister for Social Development and the Minister for Education to the launch of the Delivering Social Change Nurture Unit Signature Project. It's at Curry Primary School on the 20th of February. I have a hold on my diary for something else at the moment that I can't shift if it comes through. So if I cannot go, members content, we offer it to the Deputy Chair, and if he can't go, we'll come round in seniority.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Page 6, members, is a copy of our current invitations. Oh, Clark, did anybody attend the colloquium on Friday?
I know there was other assembly representations.
I'm just mindful that the Attorney General had his colloquium on Friday. I'll maybe ask if there's any report coming out of that. On to item 3, which is the draft minutes. And in fact, there are revised draft minutes, members, in your table pack at page 8. They were amended to include the additional proposals in relation to the Ombudsman agenda item. And that's page 13 of the table pack. It was just making clear that there were a range of options which wasn't clear in the original draft. Are we content to agree the revised draft minutes?
Agreed.
Thank you. Matters arising, page 16 of your pack, is a response from the Department to the Committee's request for further information following the briefing from the head of the Executive's office in Brussels, which we received on the 23rd of October last. The responses may well be of interest to other Assembly committees, so in the absence of any comment, are members content to forward on to statutory committees?
Agreed.
Thank you. Page 27, response from the Department to our request for further information in relation to the Delivering Social Change for Children and Young People consultation. This gives us further information on how Scotland and Wales are addressing child poverty. It provides a copy of the Department's consultation plan for delivering social change for children consultation and a list of consultees. And I believe those are the issues that we asked them to address at the briefing. We also agreed to write to ministers to express our concern about the reduced consultation period. At page 56 of your electronic packs, you'd see the response from the Department, who have agreed to extend the consultation period to 10 weeks, finishing on 31st March of this year. I take it we're all content to welcome that. Thank you. Following a request for a response to the Environment Committee's inquiry into wind energy, we wrote to the Department seeking information on the Executive's policy on siting wind turbines on executive-owned property. On page 58 of your packs is the Department's response, which indicates the management of the estate is primarily a matter for the Department of Finance and Personnel. So, in the absence of comments, which are... Well, yes.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly this is something that has come up in my committee in relation to perhaps maybe at the start a loose comment where Northern Ireland Water property in relation to the Silent Valley was mentioned, which would be unthinkable that those sort of things would go into an area of natural beauty. I think there is an issue that very clearly, you know, if it's government property, if it's areas of natural beauty, if it's maybe ASSIs or all that sort of thing, I mean, it's just unthinkable that something like that will be put into areas like that. So I think it is an issue that we should highlight, and it should be highlighted back by this department also to DOE, who are responsible for the planning issues around it.
Yep. I mean, I absolutely agree, Jimmy, and I think the minister, the DRD minister, agrees with you that it's unimaginable. But that's a single lock. A new minister could take a different.
But I mean, in fairness to the department, in my case, and the minister, it wasn't. The loose comment came from NIW officials, which immediately started an alarm bell ringing. So, I mean, I think it's something that we need to be aware about, and something that we should not. Well, I certainly wouldn't be supportive of it. I mean, it's for other members to make up their own minds, but I certainly would not support any area of Mornswick, you know, above any place.
The community wouldn't support it.
And the community would
that's
support
the
it.
key in this.
Yeah.
So, a proposal, do we write? I mean, that we've been advised it's primarily a matter for the Department of Finance and Personnel.
It's qualified.
That's the management of the estate.
I would propose that we write to the department chair on the basis that, you know, it has come up. It has come up in my committee. There's been an issue about it in relation to NIW land, and we write to DFP along the lines of drawing it to their attention. And I mean, I think a wholesome conversation needs to be had in relation to them, in terms probably from DFP and then down through to DOE in terms of planning. But as Bronwyn says, you know, the public wouldn't agree to that at all.
No. Well, should we ask primarily if there are any red lines?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy with that.
such as ASSIs.
Well, I have to watch, Chair, because in Benevna there was a planning application for a wind farm, and the planners refused it, I understand. I went to appeal and was overturned. And there's a further planning application in that same area, which is another area of outstanding attribute. So I agree with Jimmy. I think we've got to be very careful.
I'm sorry for prolonging this,
Oh,
but
okay.
the other thing that strikes me in relation to it is, should we be having a conversation with, should the department, given that it's OFMDFM, be having a conversation with the Crown Estates in relation to the offshore ones? You know, in terms of the impact that they may well have if they were put in. I'm not sure whether that conversation would be had or not, but
Maybe
perhaps be raised, maybe by DFP as well at the same time, maybe if they're talking to officials from Westminster.
Okay. Well, what I would propose is that we do some scoping and some research here to find out whether there's clear lines of authority and responsibility, policy, and the rest, and then we can pick it up. Okay. Thanks, Jimmy. List of outstanding issues is next. That's page 60. And then correspondence, members. What I'll do is I'll pause for comment, but I'll not keep asking for comment, so we'll go through this as quickly as we can. Beginning page 63, a letter from the Department indicating the commencement of a routine review of the Commissioner for Public Appointments Northern Ireland order. I suggest we just simply await the outcome of that review. Page 64, memo from the Committee for Finance and Personnel, including a briefing paper on the Budget Bill Northern Ireland 2014 and the accompanying spring supplementary estimates from the Department of Finance and Personnel. Page 71, a copy of correspondence from the Department to the Committee for Education regarding funding for the primary integrating/enriching education project. Page 72, correspondence from the Department to the Committee for Enterprise, Trade and Investment regarding US funding uptake, something, members, I think is featured in today's newsletter. Page 73, correspondence from the Department to the Committee for Enterprise, Trade and Investment regarding recommendation 25 of that committee's renewable energy inquiry. The next page, 74, correspondence from the Committee for Social Development to the Department highlighting a motion on the delay of welfare reform legislation. Page 75, an update summary from the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission on the European Court of Human Rights decision of the 28th of January in O'Keefe versus Ireland, and a copy of the concluding observations of the Committee on the Rights of the Child in relation to the second period report of the Holy See. The full copy of this ECHR report is available in the committee office if members wish to see it, but it is bulky, I believe. Yeah. Page 100. Correspondence from the Business Office advising that the annual report and accounts for 2012-13 for the Commissioner for Older People have been laid. The Committee Office has one copy of the document, and therefore any member who wishes to view should contact the Committee Office. And finally, in this section, page 101, copy of correspondence from the Business Office advising the OFMDFM retention and disposal schedule has been laid. The Committee Office again has one copy, and again, if members wish to view, they should contact the Committee Office. Moving then, members, to tabled items. Page 4 is a document from NILGA on its proposal to establish a Northern Ireland Strategic European Partnership panel, and I think NILGA would be keen to come to committee to talk to this proposal. Agreed. Could I just point out, members, page 5, you'll see the organogram, the organisational diagram, and this committee features in a way that I'm not entirely sure we should be comfortable with. So
that's in tabled items, Chair. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tables items starting at page 4. Page 5 has the proposed structure, which gives us a governance rather than an oversight role. I'm not saying this should prevent us from hearing from NILGA, but I think we just need to be aware of the proposal. Are we content to invite them in?
Yeah, it's something we should raise with them, Chair, in terms of... It does seem a bit strange.
So are you happy enough we say that we're happy to receive a briefing, but we would have concerns with the proposals?
We not point out that ours is a scrutiny role in terms of...
Yeah, rather than governance.
No one else surely, Chair, can change that rule.
No, I mean, we're actually in this, we're sitting above the junior ministers.
That's the start anyway, isn't it?
Well, that's...
Moving on.
Yes. Okay. Right, so just to be aware, members, that it's not necessarily something that we can... It's absolutely not something we can approve on the nod. We'll need...
Yep.
We're happy to invite them up.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Page 16 have tabled copies of responses to the committee's report on delivering social change signature programme event, which is being debated this Monday. Responses have been received from OFMDFM, Department for Employment and Learning, Department for Enterprise, Trade and Investment, Department of Education and the Committee for Education. And this is provided to members in advance of the debate for information. Page 27, a further memo from the Committee for Finance and Personnel, providing a briefing paper from DFP, setting out DFP's draft estimate showing the detail of current and capital expenditure and reconciliation to the net cash requirement. The Finance Committee agreed it may be helpful to circulate the DFP paper because they think it is a potential model for other departments to follow in future in terms of briefing committees at a departmental level. So on that one, members, I wonder if you're in a position to say whether you would like to see a similar breakdown applied by the department, or whether you'd like a week to consider.
Could we have a week, please?
I think that's more than reasonable, given it's a tabled item.
Yep, agreed.
Yeah. To my right,
Agreed.
Yeah, agreed.
take a week.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Members, we're on to our first substantive briefing, which is agenda item 6, a briefing from the Department on the review of the Good Relations Indicators consultation document. So just, members, as we wait for the officials to come, I forgot to say there was an event upstairs this morning, which was the publication of a research report into the legacy of the impact of the Omagh bombing, conducted by QE5 on behalf of a group called Families Moving On. They gave me a copy of the report for each committee member, which Marion has, so if you want to help yourself to a copy on the way out, they would appreciate it very much. So, Good Relations Indicators consultation. We're joined by Pauline Donnan, Donna Blaney and Fergus Pivot. Welcome back, Fergus.
Thank you, Chair.
Over to you for opening remarks.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Try and keep these quite brief. Thanks for the invitation to be here today to inform the committee about the review of the Good Relations Indicators and the current consultation process. As I said at the end of last week, I'd like to apologise to the committee for the oversight in not providing it with an advance copy of the consultation document. As you're aware, the Together Building a United Community strategy sets out a range of actions and commitments for government departments, communities and individuals who will work together to build a united community and achieve change against 4 strategic priorities. And those are our children and young people, our shared community, our safe community and our cultural expression. There was a commitment within the strategy to review the existing set of good relations indicators. The revised set of indicators will be used to inform and help measure progress against each of the 4 key priorities in the strategy I have just mentioned. The original Good Relations indicators were developed to monitor progress under a shared future and the racial equality strategy. The baseline report was published in 2007 and updates have been published annually since then. The latest update was published in January 2013 and the next report will be published following agreement on the revised indicator set. The review of the indicators began last year following the publication of the strategy, and the first step was to consider relevant material such as the strategy itself, District Council Good Relation Action Plans, Good Relation Measurement Framework 2010, responses from the consultation on the programme for CSI, and other available data. An advisory group was set up in June 2013 and included representatives from a range of organisations, which I'll just read out, Chair, because I think it gives a sense of who was engaged. They were the Community Relations Council, Belfast City Council, Derry City Council, Coleraine Borough Council, PSNI, the Contested Spaces Education Programme, the Housing Executive, the Equality Commission, Embrace, NICEM, Chinese Welfare Association, Departments of Education, Justice, Culture, Arts and Leisure and Social Development. In August 2013, that advisory group agreed a set of outcome-focused criteria for selecting appropriate indicators. And those criteria were that indicators should be outcome-focused, that they should be relevant, that data are available and that data are robust. An initial set of indicators was developed for discussion at a workshop with the advisory group in September, and following that workshop, a draft set of indicators was agreed by the advisory group. And these are the indicators that are now being consulted on more widely. The consultation period has been running from the 22nd of January and will close on the 15th of March. Consultees are being invited to provide any comments on the indicators via an online survey that was referenced in the consultation document. The committee has already received a copy of that consultation document, and it contains, as you will have seen, a draft set of indicators under each of the 4 priorities set out in the strategy. A number of data sources have been used to develop the indicators, such as the Northern Ireland Life and Times Survey and the Young Life and Times Survey, as well as administrative data from the School Omnibus Survey, PSNI and the Housing Executive. For example, under the key priority for children and young people, the draft indicators measure changes in relation between Protestants and Catholics over time, the level of regular contact young people have with the other community, including playing sport and socialising, and the extent to which young people are sharing school facilities with pupils from the other community. The indicators in the consultation document have been developed at a strategic level to monitor progress of the strategy, and the intention is to use them as a framework to monitor progress at every level of implementation. District Council Good Relations action plans will be measured against the revised indicators, and in this way delivery of the strategy can be monitored more effectively. Initial discussions on how this will be achieved by local government began at a conference in December of last year. In terms of ongoing engagement with the committee, we welcome the committee's ongoing interest in the implementation of the strategy, including the development of these indicators. And the consultation phase will provide the committee with the opportunity to shape the outcome, and we're happy to engage with the committee at any time or on any aspect of the consultation. We would intend to brief the committee again following the end of the consultation period, and this will provide an overview of responses to enable the committee to reply as a super consultee. Again, Chair, grateful for the opportunity to be here, and we'll try and answer questions, and if not, reply in writing if that's appropriate.
Okay, thank you very much, Fergus. You've dealt with what was at the top of my head was the engagement, and I accept the apology. Let's move on. Okay. The engagement from here on is of interest, so you'll come back to us at the end of the consultation period when you have something shaped.
To give the committee really a sense of what has emerged to help finalise your own thinking, Chair. We have found that helpful in the past, and I think that is a way to go for.
Do you have a timeline in mind?
Well, the consultation closes on the 15th of March. I suppose it would depend on how many responses we get. How many have we got to date, Paul?
Just over 20 to date.
So, as with all of these things, we tend to find that more come in towards the end. So, it would be difficult to give you an actual date at this point, Chair, but as soon as we can, when we have enough information to give you a sense.
Have you any idea how many you can expect from experience? Or is that how long is a piece of string question?
I think it might be, Chair.
That's okay. Okay. It's an 8-week as opposed to 12-week period, Fergus. Why only 8?
Well, we did a significant amount of pre-consultation with that advisory group and the bodies that I have outlined to you, Chair. And it's not necessarily consulting on a new policy as such, it's consulting on a set of indicators. And that's the rationale why, because of the engagement primarily with the group that has advised us on the work to date.
Yeah. Just on the composition of the advisory group, because I heard you talk about some of the outcomes you're looking for, which I think members' convenience is from page 113 of the pack. And it's, in key priority 1 is engaging with children and young people to get their views.
Yeah.
And yet the Commissioner for Children and Young People was not part of the advisory group. The Commissioner for Older People wasn't on the advisory group. The Commissioner for Victims and Survivors wasn't on the advisory group, is there? But why are these commissioners excluded?
Well, I'm not sure I would say, I'm not sure to say that they were excluded. I think what we were trying to do was bring together people who had experience of developing indicators, and specifically from our point of view at local council level, because clearly the Good Relations District Council programme is going to be a key feature of how the strategy is going to be embedded. That's not to say that those individuals and organisations can't respond to the consultation document, and in fact I was speaking to the Commissioner for Children this morning around the indicator set, and they're very well aware that the consultation is out.
Yeah, I just these people have statutory duties to promote and champion
They have.
The interests of these specific groups, but you don't think there's any weakness in not including them in the advisory group?
No, not at that pre-consultation stage, Chair, no.
Okay, Jimmy Spratt.
Yeah, just in one area in relation, Fergus, to the councils, local government, given the dramatic change that's taken place from 2010 to 11, elections now a few weeks away. I mean, you said, if I picked you up right, you said that you consulted the district councils a few weeks ago. But how do you tie that into the new now that the consultation process is ongoing, and towards the end of May you'll have STCs running to work with the few councils, and if you take the safety aspects to it, town centre safety, whatever safety where the PSNI are also involved, I suspect the PSNI will use this as an opportunity to massage their figures again for crime statistics and all the rest of it, in terms of getting a better results out there, which normally happens. So is the consultation process too short to allow for some take from local government, who are obviously going to be a major player in the whole thing?
We recognise the importance of local government, and we had a conference with the District Council Good Relations officers just before Christmas, where the discussion on the indicators took place. And as I think I mentioned last week as well, we are intending to engage with the new chief executives of those district councils as early as we can once those elections take place, to take them through the impact or the potential impact of the strategy itself in general, but specifically on the councils and on their funding, and if necessary around the indicators as well. So that's how we would intend to keep engaging with those councils.
Okay. Deputy Chair Chris Little.
Thanks, Chair. How many indicators are there?
At the moment, there are over 90 indicators, which is quite a large set. And actually what we've found is that trying to interpret those in the past has been quite difficult to get an overall sense of whether things are going well or not so well. So at the moment, in the draft set of indicators, there are 22.
Okay. Is it possible to go through them quickly? Chair, do we have time for that, or is that not advisable?
Oh, is there a particular purpose? Have you an outcome in mind?
I just think it would be worth the committee having gone through. If there's only 22, well, I can pick some out that I have particular interest in.
I prefer it, Chris.
No problem. That's grand. Okay. Key priority 2, our shared community. Let me see.
Page 114, members.
Sorry, bear with me a second. D, let me see what one's that. Outcome 2.1D, percentage whose school has been involved in shared education with another school in the last academic year. And then goes on in outcome 2.2 to ask, or sorry, no, stay with that one, who've been involved in shared education. Is there agreed understanding of what shared education is? Is it going to be easy for people to answer that type of question? Or is it
I would imagine that when this is issued, there will be guidance notes attached, which would set out some information for individuals and organisations to be able to complete the survey. And I think, Pauline, if I'm right, individuals will be surveyed as well and to get the responses?
Yes, individuals will be surveyed, but my understanding with this particular indicator is that the Department of Education will be collecting the data through the school omnibus survey, so they will be providing guidance on what they consider shared education to be.
I suppose it'll be for us to probe what exactly that means as well. Percentage who would define the neighbourhood where they live as a shared space. Again, how are we going to help people to answer that, or does someone else answer that?
That's through that will be answered through a population-wide survey, and there are interviewer prompts for all of the questions within that to explain exactly what we mean by that. So the context of what it means.
Northern Ireland Life and Time survey, is it?
Yes.
Okay. What percentage of the indicators are Northern Ireland Life and Time survey questions then?
I haven't actually counted them up. I would say roughly about half are relying on attitudinal surveys, so whether that's the Northern Ireland Life and Time survey or the Young Life and Time survey.
It does say, Chris.
Apologies if I missed it.
Yeah, but I mean, every question gives its source.
It just seems like quite a few of them are Northern Ireland Life and Time survey,
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I hopefully go through them myself in a bit more detail as well there. How does 07, 13 and 14 differ? You've said that they've gone from 90 to 22, so if that seems like a significant change. How is one to assess progress if the indicators are differing significantly?
I mean, I can answer at a strategic level, and Pauline, you maybe want to add something from a statistical level. And clearly now, with the strategy being in place, one of the commitments was to develop a new set of indicators to measure progress on that specific strategy. I think the indicators that were there previously were looking at a shared future and the racial equality strategy as they stood at that time. And I'm not sure to what extent some of the indicators cross over. Not
as much as they did, no.
So we're starting again in terms how are we going to assess progress?
Are you querying, Chris, about over time from 2007 forward how attitudes are going to be measured?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's appropriate that there's a new set of indicators put into place to help measure the impact of the new strategy. I'm not sure to what extent the previous indicators will flow through, and it will be possible to measure over time.
Yeah, I mean, I think the good thing about many of the indicators that we've chosen is that there are time series going back not just to 2007, but sort of beyond that. So we will have a good time series of, people's attitudes and, other indicators as well to carry forward.
Okay, and are you open to people adding new indicators then, obviously? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I mean, that's part of the purpose of the consultation. I mean, the consultation document is based on the work of the advisory group, but as with any consultation, the final indicators, which will be agreed by ministers, have to be shaped by views received during the consultation.
And this last question, Chair, how are you publicising the consultation process then?
It has been publicised on the OFM DFM website. It has been publicised with the members of the advisory group, and we have also sent it out to a list of organisations and stakeholders that we believe would have a significant interest in it. But taking into account the Chair's point there, we'll look at that list again, just to make sure that we have got representative bodies as well.
Is it possible to get a copy of the list?
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks, Chair.
Has there been any engagement, Fergus, by yourselves directly then with groups on the ground, for example, youth groups on interface areas, or have you worked entirely through the the advisory panel?
I think the work has mainly been through the advisory panel, Chair, but clearly we believe that they have been bringing to those meetings views of their representative bodies.
Gotcha. Okay. George Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks to the team as well for the presentation. Just a comment and an example of what's happening around my area. For two schools, namely Lima Valley High and St Mary's, one Protestant, one Catholic, are working so well together. At the moment, we were doing for a presentation the Education Minister, myself, and the Chair of the Education Committee last week. And it was absolutely fabulous to see the way that they'd worked. They've actually applied for lottery funding to build a bridge so that the pupils can interact, from one school to the other. And that's happened at the present time. We're using each other's classes and mingling with each other, even on a social level. And to my mind, anyway, from her point of view, I think that is the way forward. There's a lot of bigotry and sectarianism out there, but I think that's where we have to start. School level. These are primary schools. I was absolutely astounded to see the excellent work that was taking place last week. Just wanted to highlight that.
Okay, thank you. And clearly within the overall strategy itself, there is the proposal for 10 new shared education campuses.
Correct. That's right.
But underneath that, it's recognised that sort of sharing that you're mentioning is really important. And we fund a programme, for example, called Contested Spaces, which does a lot of very good work at interface areas. So there's a number of funding programmes available to help with that kind of low-level work, if I can phrase it that way.
There's a pathway between the two schools, and a lot of antisocial behaviour and so forth. That's where the bridge is sort of going to sort of connect the two schools so that the pupils can access each other.
Yeah, and it's a visible sign that they're connected and working together as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's right.
And just if I may, George, to pick up on the point, because I think the indicators here are specific and exclusive to religious differences, and yet you've got sexual orientation, gender, disability within your basket of concerns. Why are they not in the indicators?
Well, I think certainly from a racial equality point of view, there's a separate set of indicators going to be developed for the racial equality strategy to determine views on that over time. Pauline, is there any rationale as to why the other issues?
I mean, no other than there are other strategies focusing on older people, etc., and there are indicators being developed within those particular strategies. So the focus very much was on, I suppose, religion in this context, although there are a couple of indicators where we do refer to minority ethnic people as well, just in terms of the general level of good relations and people's attitudes towards other people living within their area.
You wouldn't think that people whose primary concern is their sexual orientation, their disability, that they will feel that they're not fully respected by being excluded from this, or not included, if you prefer that language?
Well, I think it's something, Chair, that needs to be reflected through the development of those other strategies that are going to come forward, the racial equality strategy, gender equality strategy and sexual orientation strategy, for example. And certainly I'll reflect on the point with my senior colleagues in the department as to how those are going to be measured over time. Yeah.
But they would be viewed through the lens of good relations as well as other
They are,
measures.
that's right, and they're very clearly within the overall strategy itself.
Okay, thank you very much. Just final point of my Fergus. I'm just looking at the terms of reference for the indicators, and you begin with a quote from the T-Buck strategy. The vision of a united community based on equality of opportunity, desirability of good relations, and reconciliation. Does the department have a definition of reconciliation?
Not that I'm aware of, Chair.
Well, how do you know how you're going to succeed?
Well, I think part of this is what we're trying to do through the development of the indicators is to test people's views. I mean, as we were indicating last week, good relations and sectarianism are issues that may be taken forward through the legislation for the development of the new Equality and Good Relations Commission. Reconciliation, again, is one of those words which can have different meanings to different people, and it may be something through the development of the indicators, as Pauline was suggesting there, through interviewer prompts that we may have to look at in terms of how we allow people to answer the questions in an informed way.
I think I'm concerned that we have a strategy which has a vision based on a concept that you can't define.
Well, I think it allows people the space to reflect on what their own view is, on what those words mean to them at an individual and community level as well, Chair, without being overly prescriptive.
Is that not constructive ambiguity?
Well, I think it's an opportunity for people to reflect on what type of a society they want for themselves.
But they're defining those issues for themselves. May not be the same as the guy who lives next door.
And I think that's one of the issues within our society. We have attempted within the strategy to define sectarianism, for example. That may not be what individuals view sectarianism. It is an attempt at a definition of it. So those sorts of issues, I think, may depend, as you have suggested, on an individual's experience of them.
Okay. Donna, Pauline and Fergus, thank you very much. So we'll look forward to seeing you at some point after they finish the consultation. Thank you. Okay, members, our next briefing is agenda item 7, and it's the review of the gender equality strategy. This was initiated in order to identify and address any shortcomings in the existing gender equality strategy. In your electronic pack, the clerk's brief begins at page 118, and at 120, copies of a letter from the department on the review, and that's followed by a research paper on good practice in gender equality policy in the EU 27 nations. And then in your table papers at page 28, a copy of the department's briefing paper as received yesterday afternoon.
Page 39.
Page 39.
That's
Sure?
No. Page 39.
Those are new table papers. Sorry, members. I think the table papers on the department's briefing paper start at page 39. Yeah. Now we welcome to the committee Patricia Carey, who's Head of Equality and Human Rights and Social Change in the department, Martina Hanna, Acting Head of Gender Equality Policy, and Nuala McNamee, who doesn't have a...
I'm also from Gender Equality Policy.
Okay, thank you, Nuala. Members, Martina, I think, has asked me to point out that she may need to lip read. So if we can make sure that we are
Directly looking at me.
staring straight on and trying not to mumble and covering our mouths and all the rest.
Thank you.
Welcome. So, Patricia, are you making some opening remarks?
Yes, Chair.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. We welcome this opportunity to brief members on progress to date on the gender equality strategy, and I'm going to cover progress made during 2013, followed by our future plans for developing the equality agenda through the implementation of a new strategy. We'd then be happy to take any questions. So in terms of progress to date, the committee will have received a written update on the review of the strategy in October 2013, and at the time would have been advised that the Gender Advisory Panel meeting in November would look at the review. The Gender Equality Strategy covers a period of 2006 to 2016, and it sets out an overarching framework for departments, agencies and other relevant statutory authorities to promote gender equality. And then, deriving from the strategy, departmental action plans set out a range of gender equality objectives, expected outcomes and performance targets that are intended to give effect to the strategy. The Gender Advisory Panel comprises stakeholder representatives working with the department to help develop the gender equality strategy and the action plans and monitor their subsequent delivery. So that was set up to aid the department, and I'll say a bit more about future plans for the panel later. A review of the strategy was completed, and a review of the cross-departmental action plans was part of that review, and that was undertaken in 2013. And it was overseen by a steering group made up of members of the Gender Advisory Panel, OFMDF officials and the Northern Ireland Statistics and Research Agency, NISRA. And the review looked at how effectively the strategy had performed against its objectives, assessed the effectiveness of the action plans, and then made recommendations for the aims, objectives and delivery of the strategy and action plans in the years remaining from 2014 to 2016. NISRA completed the research element of the review in April 2013, and the main findings were based on desk research and surveys of the members of the Gender Advisory Panel and the Cross-Departmental Equality Practitioners Group. And they were that the strategy itself, including its aims and objectives, remained valid and relevant. The action plans through which the strategy was developed, however, needed to be more directly linked to the strategy's aims and objectives. And again, that actions should be linked to numerical or measurable targets. And I know the committee is very keen to ensure that work completed in the department is measured against targets. So that was obviously a key finding of that review. And of course, the targets should address not just outputs but also outcomes. There was also an issue around monitoring and reporting of performance, and a view that that needed to be regular and formalised, and a view that the role of the Gender Advisory Panel needed to be reviewed. A key gap in the current strategy was that transgender issues hadn't really been addressed enough, and transgender people whose gender identity conflicts with their biological sex face lifelong challenges such as victimisation, and this can include physical and psychological abuse, and increased risk of suicide. So obviously a key part of any gender strategy is to look at the needs and rights of transgender people. So the steering group looked at these findings and proposals, and it made a number of recommendations, including that the current membership of the advisory panel should be reviewed, that there should be a reworking of the action plans, including the development of suitable targets, and OFMDFM officials are working with departments and NISRA with a view to developing action plans that will enable those objectives to be met. So rather than continuing the existing strategy from 2014 to 2016, given that it was a 10-year strategy and given that the review had identified some fairly significant issues with the strategy, a proposal was put forward that a new strategy would be developed. Any significant revision of the current strategy would of course have required consultation and a review of all the work that had been done, and that could have taken us to 2016 without then having a new strategy in place. So rather than do that, a proposal was developed that we would have a new strategy running from 2014, and that allows then this committee and this current administration to put its own stamp on a gender equality strategy. We have one from 2016 that has served its purpose, but the review identified a number of issues that needed to be addressed. So a new strategy running from 2014 through to 2020 allows us to look at the current position around gender equality, look at the issues that there are, develop objectives that are current and targets along with those, and to work with this committee and with other departments to actually reach a stage where we have a strategy that can be delivered through robust, sound action plans. And again, the Gender Advisory Panel could play a key role in that. At the minute, it provides excellent advice to the department, but it doesn't have a formal monitoring role. So there aren't the same drivers, there isn't the same holding to account of people from the sector and externally to ensure that there's an independence and a rigour brought to the whole monitoring process outside of government itself. So that was seen as a key advantage of a new strategy. Obviously, a new strategy will require public consultation and executive approval, but we believe that the benefits of moving to a new strategy are significant and outweigh trying to continue with the existing strategy until 2016 and waiting until 2016 before developing a new strategy. So that's the approach we're suggesting should be taken forward. The new strategy will take account of a number of initiatives that have been developed since 2006, so it will be able to take account of all the strategies that are being developed in OFM, DFM and other departments at the minute. So Together Building a United Community, Bright Start, the childcare strategy, delivering social change for children, the outcome of the committee findings on the elimination of discrimination against all women, CEDAW, and other priorities on strengthening women's voices that have been identified by the Home Office and others. So, in conclusion, we've considered the recommendation to move to new strategy as distinct from a revised version of the current strategy, and OFM DFM ministers have agreed that this is the most appropriate option. The initial work is now beginning of this, and we welcome this opportunity to update the committee on this work, and would be now happy, Chair, to take any questions that you have.
Okay, Tricia, thank you very much. After the briefing, I'll open it straight away to members. And Stephen Moutry.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for presenting to us. Can I ask, can you enlighten me as to the composition of the Gender Advisory Panel? You're talking about reviewing it and the key role it will have. I, for one, don't know membership of it at the moment.
Okay, I'll ask Martina.
Yes, I have a full membership list here, and we would have, it's primarily made up of men's and women's organisations. The gap in the Gender Advisory Panel that we have at this moment in time is we don't have childcare representation. We don't have a sort of a community voice representation on the panel. We didn't have transgender representation on the panel. That has been addressed, and we do have transgender representation. However, if we move to a new strategy, the current panel does represent all of the Section 75 groupings, with the exception of the two sort of missing gaps that I've explained to you. What it doesn't have, and I'm going to be sort of very distinct about this, the panel has about 36 to 38 members. It is an advisory panel that is supposed to be challenging the gender equality strategy and ensuring that the objectives are delivered. When you have a panel of that size, it has not been able to do the job that it is set up to do. So what we're hoping to get to through a new gender equality strategy is a panel that will still represent the Section 75 groupings, but will be a little bit widened to include childcare voice, community voice, but also what we want are the skills to be able to deliver the strategy and the objectives. So what we want is a panel that can actually, when we have an action plan in place, monitor that action plan, analyse it, and challenge where challenge is needed, and to take best practice where it is displayed and share that best practice across government. So, sorry, you asked one question about the makeup of the panel. That's how it's made up currently, but with a new gender equality strategy, we actually want to be very proactive and get people on board that have the skills to actually develop the strategy, deliver the strategy, and to literally do what they're set out to do, to advise us on what needs to change.
Okay, thank you. If you've got 36 to 38 members now and you're going to add a few more, it's going to be like a super council.
No, that is not. Sorry, I do apologise for interrupting. That's not the idea. The idea is to renew the panel and to actually have an open process by which we will be looking for the skills that are needed, as opposed to all of the groups that are currently represented on the panel. It's not effective, and I have to say, they are an amazing group of people. They are very passionate about what they are doing, but we need to be very proactive and deliver the business. So we will be going to an open process to recruit
Thank you.
appropriate people.
Can I ask you through the chair and the clerk, can you forward the composition of the current panel?
Yes.
So members can have it.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Very welcome. Megan Fearon.
Thanks, Chair. Just firstly, what involvement does the women's sector have with developing this?
Developing a new strategy as we move forward. Sorry, Patricia, do you mind if I take this? The review of the strategy has involved the Gender Advisory Panel, and the review steering group was made up of 5 members of the panel as it sits, and 4 of those members were from women's organisations, and they have been very involved in the review to date. And in fact, we had developed what we would have seen as a very first cut draft of a new strategy. However, because everything that we were analysing and everything that we were working on was telling us that really the current strategy did not have the mechanics to support its delivery, that is why we're moving to the new strategy. The current Gender Advisory Panel and the current Gender Equality Strategy will still be in place. So they will be our key stakeholders as we move forward, and we will not move forward without them. So the women's organisations are exceptionally well represented. The men's organisations, we have 4 men's organisations represented on the panel. However, we want to renew that panel to bring a level of balance and skills into it so that all the 4 quadrants of the gender equality strategy are represented.
And well, obviously tackling the gender pay gap is one of the executive's EU priorities. Will that have any bearing on the development of the new strategy?
Well, you'll probably be aware that recently we had the Code of Practice that the Equality Commission published on the gender pay and how it should be addressed. Right? But yes, what we will be doing is we will be doing further analysis on what needs to go into the action plan. And I'm sort of straying off slightly a bit, but our current action plan will maybe explain why we're doing this. Our current action plan had 126 actions. The majority of those actions were for women. Now, out of the 126 actions, we can actually only say at this point that since 2006, 37 of those actions have been judged to be delivered, because the majority of the actions are not measurable. They are not keyed into specific indicators, and we want to move on a business basis to an action plan that will give us what we need to measure in terms of gender equality. And yes, pay gap will be one of the things that we will be analysing further and working on, but we need to do further analysis on what we need to develop for men, women, boys and girls, and we'll be working very closely with NISRA on that basis to help and assist us in doing that.
We want to obviously develop an evidence-based system and look at persistent inequalities, and the fact that we're reviewing and developing a new strategy now is good timing, because when the initial strategy was developed in 2006, it wasn't that far after Section 75 came into play, and equality and gender equality at the time was mainly defined in terms of issues affecting women. So obviously we don't want to move away at all from gender equality issues affecting women, but there is a need to have an equal focus on those gender issues that affect men, and some issues will affect men and women, but others will affect men and others will affect women. So again, we think this is a good time to be developing the strategy, looking at persistent inequalities as they affect men and women, using an evidence base to do that, and developing the strategy and then the action plans to take account of that. And as Martina said, we'll be involving lots of women's organisations, men's organisations, the various commissions, Equality Commissions, Children and Young People's Commissioner, the Older People's Commissioner, and the Equality Commission and other commissions, to make sure that we're looking at the right areas and that the actions that are developed are actually going to make a difference in terms of gender equality.
Just 2 more questions. Obviously there's a role for DEL in talking about tackling the pay gap, but will there be any role for education to play or any of the schools? Because I know a recent survey was released there that said that over 25% of young girls are afraid to raise their hand in class because of unhappiness about their appearance, which is just insane. And in terms of educating young people about sexual violence and domestic violence, I know of schools in my area where the PSNI have gone in and given talks, pulled the girls out of the class to talk to them and left boys in class to continue learning. So, I mean, is there a role for schools to play in all of that?
The action plan and the gender equality strategy that accompanies, or the gender equality strategy and the action plan that accompanies the gender equality strategy and delivers it, will cut across all of the departments. So we will be going out to all of the departments to look at what key inequalities are affecting their policy areas. When you hit on education, there are very specific inequalities for young women and girls. There are absolutely specific inequalities there. There are also inequalities for young boys and men, and it's getting that balance correct and addressing inequality wherever it hits us. And if you get the gender balance right at that young age, you can nearly hit in on every strategy that you're working on that affects it. But yes, you're absolutely correct, and we will be working with the departments in order to do that.
And I think as part of the consultation process as well, we will be seeking to identify, we'll obviously be carrying out full equality impact assessment and looking at those issues, and it's a two-way process. It's us learning about the issues and people presenting the issues and developing on that basis. So there may be hidden issues that we're not aware of, but there are certainly key issues like the one you identify that clearly we would hope either through the consultation process or through gathering our own evidence and talking to schools be identifying those and addressing them as appropriate.
And then just finally, I've been watching with interest the developing situation in France where they're undertaking a complete overhaul of gender equality legislation. Are there any discussions around that or any inspiration taken from it, I suppose? And one of the main things I should say that they're tackling is the degrading media and the portrayal of women in the media and advertisers and all the rest of it, because it does have knock-on effects, especially on young women. So, I mean...
And actually, it's one of the nice things about being a committee. That's lovely to hear. But certainly at this stage, moving forward to a new gender equality strategy, it gives us that opportunity to do some benchmarking across different, areas in different countries. And the lovely thing about moving forward on the new gender equality strategy is the big opportunity, as Patricia said, to do full public consultation. And we will do that, and absolutely delighted to do it on this strategy. But yes, now that you've said that, that's something that we'll take on board and we'll look at. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The strategy is 8 years old, 126 actions, 37 delivered. In Olympic terms, which of the podium finishes, which actions get the gold, silver, bronze?
I've highlighted some of the actions because I didn't want to sort of cover all of the different actions. Some of the actions that we had are actually not measurable in terms of gold, silver, bronze. But for example, I could give you one very good action, and if you just bear with me, I'll pull that out. My apologies. Yes. The review of the strategy, which was published last year, covered what each of the departments had undertaken and the progress that had been made. And one of the very good returns was from the DOE on women. And the return was a good return detailing progress of increasing percentage of women applying for DOE public appointments, and it went from 22.8% to 39.2%. And the percentage on DOE board went from 20.5% to 24.6%. Now again, public appointments is an area that, is an issue for representation, but the departments are working with the Public Appointments Commissioner on that issue, but that for the DOE, and what I would like to do as part of moving forward is analyse, and that's what I was saying, if our gender advisory panel is put in the position to do the job that it's meant to do, then we would be analysing how that was achieved and why the difference was made. and we would be pulling that forward with other departments. So that would, for me, would be a good.
Okay, thank you. Leslie Cree.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for asking my question.
Oh.
Anyway, two other points. It's interesting that I'm a great believer in measuring performance so that we can see what's happening. But I'm just looking at your statistics here on the key points, and you've just referred to more statistics there. Anyone looking at that would draw a direct comparison with the numbers you have given. Would not be logical.
Yes.
But there are built-in inaccuracies there.
Yes.
Because of the size of the pool,
yes.
The inactivity rates are quite different, and the unemployment levels are different.
Yes, and you're quite right. And one of the things that Nisra highlighted very clearly to us was the difficulty in actually measuring what has been achieved. So in moving forward to a new strategy, that is the big lesson that we are going to take on board. We're going to work very closely with Nisra. What we are hoping to get to, the action plan that is produced with this original strategy, as I said, it has 126 actions. In gender equality terms, if you had between 15 to 20 very key inequalities that needed to be addressed, then you can work with those, you can measure those, you can see how they're progressing, and the gender advisory panel that we will set up will actually be tasked with doing that measurement, analysing that measurement, and advising this committee and our ministers on what progress is being made on a more reasonable level. You cannot balance these figures out because it is just not possible to do it, and that is a key issue with the strategy as it sits at the minute, and why we're.
I would have called it a fundamental flaw.
Yes, I would agree with you.
Anyway, thanks for that. I agree with that.
Yeah.
One other quick point is that the action plan, the last one we're told here is 2008-2011. What's happened since 2011?
Well, since 2011, there has been a drive within OFM, DFM to resource the Gender Equality Unit. And as a result of that drive, myself and Nuala McNamee came in specifically to work on the Gender Equality Strategy, to work on the review of it. Now, we came in at the end of 2012. We were brought into the unit in 2012. And hence, since then, we have been working on reviewing this strategy, analysing the review, working with the Gender Advisory Panel. And during this year, we have had several Gender Advisory Panel meetings, and we have had 4 meetings of the Gender Equality Strategy Review Group. And that is what has led us to this point in time. So it has been there has been an awful lot of work going on in the background, and going forward, because we have such drive with it, we will be setting up for the new gender equality strategy a project plan which we will happily share with ministers as we develop it. But within the boundaries of that project plan, we have highlighted at least 5 occasions when we will be reporting on progress to the committee and to our ministers.
And before that, there would have been a great deal of work going on with departments to develop action plans, to develop men's action plans and women's action plans, to engage with the sector, to engage with men's organisations, women's organisations, to try and identify appropriate actions to take to advance gender equality. So there was a huge amount of activity, but given that we are working on the basis of moving to a more strategic approach, there was a lot of activity, but it's difficult to then quantify just what happened as a result. So, and that's why we think this is a better approach. But departments were seeking to identify inequalities in their departments, taking actions to address them, but we weren't always capturing the outcomes of that and the information. So again, the work, there was plenty of activity, a real focus on gender equality and a real focus on addressing both issues for women and for men. But again, we're not in a position really to say, well, this made a difference in this significant way or in some other way. So that's again another reason to move to this new.
But even extrapolating just quickly on from that, the existing strategy, surely somebody was continuing to monitor what was happening on the ground?
Again, it would have been very much on an activity basis and on a basis of working with departments to identify and try and develop action plans. I think because there was a need to look at actions relating to men's equality as well. There would have been looking at various health initiatives around early identification of disease for men who are much likely to go to a doctor than women. So again, the work was being taken forward in the context of the strategy, but again, not really being reported appropriately against it, and that was one of the key findings of the review. Martina, do you want to add to that?
Yes, I would like to add to that, thank you. The Gender Advisory Panel is the panel that is set up to oversee and drive forward the strategy, and the Gender Advisory Panel did meet during that time. The reason we're now looking to change the Gender Advisory Panel is not change it as such, but to give it the authority to actually make the difference. So the Gender Advisory Panel would have been looking at what was happening with the gender equality strategy, but it really didn't have the authority or the mechanics to shore it up. And as we move forward with the new gender equality strategy, as well as developing the action plan, we will be building into the gender equality strategy a very specific role for the Gender Advisory Panel that will give them the authority to analyse what's put in front of them, to report on what's put in front of them, and to actually challenge what's put in front of them. And we will work closely with them. The nice thing about the Gender Advisory Panel as it moves forward is that NISRA have agreed, the OFM, DFM, NISRA staff have agreed that they will participate because they are the experts in doing what you're talking about and giving the advice on the key measurements. So I think you can see that, yes, we're going to develop the strategy, but we are going to develop the mechanics by which we can deliver the strategy as well. And that's exceptionally important. So the Gender Advisory Panel will have an absolutely vital and key role as we move forward. Hence why when we are recruiting that Gender Advisory Panel, we need to be very, very clear about the fact that they have the skills to be able to do that.
So in 4 years' time, we'll not be sitting around the table here discussing the same issues again?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
And in fact, each year you will have an updated report from the new gender equality strategy telling you each year what has been achieved or even not achieved in the year, because that is as important, because if something's not being achieved, you need to do something about it.
Thank you.
Bronwyn McGann.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you, and I want to wish us all the best in the work.
Okay.
Can I just ask, it's just really a comment, as someone who lives in a rural area, a heartland of a rural area, that you do actually recognise that there is a difference in urban and rural experiences. And if you look at the Bright Start document on childcare, that recognises that as well. And I do appreciate that this will be a high-level document, but I think I just have to, come from a rural point of view that is really important. I would also ask you to give consideration to engaging with groups such as Costa, which is outside Ballygolly, and also the rural network in Cookstown.
Yes.
They do a lot of good work.
Yep.
And engagements with the rural community. I think also it will be important to engage with neighbourhood renewal areas. In particular, obviously, the women there who experience high levels of poverty and disadvantage. That's really. So thank you.
Could I just say on that point, and thank you so much for that. On that point, the Northern Ireland Rural Women's Network are actually part of our Gender Advisory Panel, and they were part of the steering group as well. And we do engage with them. But yes, thank
Those
you.
additional groups.
Yes, absolutely. And which is the lovely thing about public consultation, because through your good selves, we will be asking you to encourage as many of those groups to participate in that consultation. We really do want it. Yeah.
Next, it's Chris Little, Deputy Chair.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks very much for your presentation. It's really encouraging to see that all the hard work that has gone into the last year. And Martina, you strike me as someone who is genuinely committed to leading gender equality forward as part of the department. You said that year on year we'll be able to receive reports from now on.
Yeah.
What it might not be possible for you to answer this, but why are there no reports for the last 6 years?
Right, I can't answer that, but I can say that in the last 2 years, because we've been concentrating on doing the review of the strategy, the strategy should have had a mid-term review. So I cannot answer why the mid-term review wasn't completed. It could have been a resource issue, it could have been anything, but it would be fundamentally wrong for me to answer something that I really genuinely don't know the answer to. But during the last 2 years, we have literally torn this strategy apart for what it has delivered, and we can give the committee an absolute assurance that if we move forward in the direction, and I'm absolutely delighted that ministers have supported us on this, and the support has been phenomenal, and we're moving forward in the delivery of what they want us to do. There will be an annual report emerging from the new gender equality strategy that will be delivered up the line. And very importantly, as I said earlier, it will cover what has been achieved, it will highlight best practice, but exceptionally importantly, it will highlight what is not being delivered. And for me, that is exceptionally positive, because if something is not being delivered, then it gives us all an opportunity to look at that as residents within Northern Ireland and say, right, what do we need to do?
Okay, but between 2006 and 2012, approximately 29% of actions only were achieved then, yeah?
Yes, but it didn't have the structures. Now, the Gender Advisory Panel, and I'm sure you will understand yourself, if you have 36 to 38 people around a room working on the business of a strategy, it's not very conducive to doing the business. And the Gender Advisory Panel was set up, I believe, in 2005. So it was set up prior to the devolved administration. Lessons have been learned between 2006 and now. And the key thing to take out of this is that the objectives that were put into the strategy in 2006, regardless of whether they had been reviewed at an earlier stage or not, they are still very relevant and still very pertinent to how we should move forward. But again, we're very open to the public consultation, and if public consultation comes back saying that we either need to add or detract slightly from that, or indeed change it a little bit, that's fine. I think you've said yourself, there's a level of passion and drive within OFM, DFM to move the gender equality strategy forward, and it will happen. So I can only give you an assurance of what we're going to produce.
I think as well, the 29% figure was a retrospective analysis of what had been achieved as far as it could be analysed against the strategy. So the strategy hadn't been set up in a way that allowed itself to easy measurement. So there weren't obvious objectives, there weren't obvious targets. The 29% isn't necessarily a reflection of what has been done or what has been done to address gender inequalities. It's the best assessment that statisticians and people reviewing it could make in terms of reaching some kind of equation as to what had been done. But again, it's not really a fair representation of what had been done insofar as it's measuring against something that wasn't set up to be measured. And again, back to what I said earlier, there has been considerable work done across all departments, considerable effort, considerable passion to actually identify and address some of those issues. And that work isn't necessarily reflected in the review. And again, it's as much to identify and to give credit for the work that's been done that we want to move to a much more transparent, robust, measurable process, because I don't think 29% represents the importance that the departments give to gender equality. We have a gender equality practitioners group. Departments are carrying out Section 75 reviews of their work, equality impact assessments, and addressing inequalities on an ad hoc basis or as they arise. So again, 29% is the best estimate that could be made against the strategy, but it's not an estimate against really all the work that has been done.
I accept that, and I can see why you want to address that. It does seem like it's taken quite a considerable amount of years to get to the point where we are addressing that. Can I ask quickly, Chair, the review steering group, did that include other departments? Because obviously a number of the key gender equality issues are are responsibilities of other departments to try and address as well?
The review itself, our colleagues in OFM DFM from NISRA actually went out to the Gender Advisory Panel, and they went out to the departmental reps on the Equality Practitioners Group. As I said earlier on, the steering group itself didn't have departmental representation on it, but it did have NISRA representation on it. But as we were moving forward, and you're absolutely quite correct in what you're saying there, on the 26th of November, when we had our Gender Advisory Panel meeting to discuss how we were moving forward with this, we actually invited every single department to have representation on that day to discuss our analysis of what had been undertaken to date and to analyse the first cut of the draft document that we were thinking of producing. And we also asked them what they felt should go into action plans and indeed how we should move forward. And the overall analysis of that, plus the review, is where we are now, that we want to move to a new strategy. So, and we will not move to a new strategy without departmental representation. And indeed, one of the other gaps on the Gender Advisory Panel that we have highlighted is the fact that it did not have departmental representation. And I think when you're talking about social and government engagement on a policy, then we need them round that panel when it is formed again.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Thank you.
Alex Atwood.
First of all, I wouldn't necessarily say this about all aspects of the life of FNDFM. I'm certainly reassured by what you're saying in relation to about where we are going now. In that regard, I would share the comments of Chris Little. I think there's a lot of reasons why there may be an increase in the number of women who are appointed to public appointments. When I was over in DOE, my rule of thumb was that any recommendations that came forward to officials in respect to public appointments, given that those recommendations were that all of the candidates at that point had achieved the threshold of being suitable for appointment, my rule of thumb was to appoint all women first. And that may be a factor. I'm sure there's other factors about why DOE appointments profile has moved positively in terms of
stars for the minister.
Sorry?
4 stars for the former minister.
Well, read that into the record there, please. But the point is, some of this.
When did peace break out?
Sorry, Chair, I have to apologise. I can't hear with more than one voice. I do apologise.
A junior place to me. And but the point is that some of this is not difficult. That if all ministers made a decision that when the appointments paper came up to them for whatever public appointment was, that all women were appointed first, then you would have, over time, a reprofiling of women in terms of public appointments generally. So all I'm pointing out is that some of this stuff at a political level is not as difficult as people sometimes imagine. And the DOE figures that you referred to may indicate that. The questions, though, are, to go back to what Chris was talking about, there seems to have been, in terms of the GES 2006 to 2012, it seems to me there's been some missing years in that there was a strategy, but there wasn't the mechanics to deliver the strategy, which was, I think, the words that Patricia or one of the officials used. So we had a strategy that didn't have the mechanics to deliver over a number of years. And given that there was a gender equality unit within OFM, DFM during those years, how was it not fully acknowledged until now that the mechanics that are now being put in place didn't exist previously?
An awful lot of the effort was put into developing action plans deriving from the strategy, and an awful lot of work with departments took place to do that. So I think it was accepted when the strategy was put in place that that was an achievement to have a gender equality strategy, and that work had to take place then to develop that. Now, the mechanics, in hindsight, have proved not to be the best way of delivering it, and we recognise that, and the mid-term review recognises that. But at the time, it was the view, the approach taken was that OFM-DFM and OFM-DFM's Gender Equality Unit would work with departments to develop action plans to help them to identify the actions that would lead to gender equality. Now, as I said before, that led to quite a bit of activity. It may well have led to good results. So it wasn't that things weren't happening. There was a huge amount of effort being undertaken by departments. There was an emphasis on developing action plans. There was difficulty, I think, initially in terms of developing action plans for men that were commensurate, men and boys that were commensurate in terms of their size with actions for women, because again, in the civil service, in society generally, it has been quite difficult, I think, to make the shift from equal opportunities being something about women to being something about men and women, and that was the excellent position that Section 75 created, where that emphasis was on gender generally to a greater extent than ever before. So again, it wasn't that departments weren't working on these issues, and it wasn't that actions weren't being developed and that work wasn't being done. I mean, there was a significant amount of work being done to do that. Because the strategy maybe, and it was a strategy of its time, it was agreed at a time, it went through the different approval processes at the time, and it was the adopted government strategy of the direct rule administration. So it wasn't perfect, but of its time it served a purpose, and the purpose was to put the emphasis on gender equality and to get the work started. And it wasn't perfect, and we now accept it wasn't perfect, and that's why there's a need to move to something else. But it did put the emphasis on gender equality in departments. It did require every single department to actually look at what it was doing in terms of gender, both for men and women, and now with an even greater emphasis on girls and boys, and identify issues. And some of the issues that we heard did start to emerge around different performances in schools. We know, for example, that there's a huge issue around young boys, and particularly on a religious basis, when they leave school, and the differences in performance. So those are the kinds of issues that started to emerge through this type of analysis that didn't happen before. So again, a lot of the preliminary work, the building of the information and evidence was done, and it wasn't a perfect model, and we've learned from that, and we're moving to what we hope is a better model. But there wasn't a vacuum. There was quite a bit going on at the time.
And I don't dispute that. It just seems that a structural flaw might have been identified long before the resource in the unit was upgraded and the review was undertaken.
Yes, but having said that, and I would have absolutely full credit to the original work that was done on the original strategy, the departments developed 129 actions, which were quite unique and novel for the time, for 2006. And the one positive that I would take out of these actions, and the one positive that I would take out of the 29% that we talk about, and the 29% is a judgment, and Israel are very clear in their review document that that is a judgment call. There were 129 actions created, and that those created actions were the responsibility of the departments to develop and deliver. Where we have maybe missed out is that we have not been able to measure, and we've been very clear in our objective in not allowing that to happen again. But yes, the work was ongoing. The Gender Advisory Panel still met on a regular basis. However, what we're doing now is, rather than, and it is not a criticism of the previous way things were developed, we're actually building on that and making the difference to make the delivery more effective.
Just to ask two brief questions then. Just to create certainty, has it been accepted that the membership of the GAP should include transgender?
Yes, that
the references
that
might be reviewed.
Yep.
It is. Has it been decided
We will be working on the Gender Advisory Panel on the basis of skills. One of the gaps highlighted by this review is that the transgender issue is not fully represented in the gender equality strategy, and the transgender voice wants to be represented as much as men, women, boys and girls. There is an issue there where they have to be represented, and we have to accept that.
And that's going to happen on the far side of the consultation.
As far as I am concerned, that is what will be happening in the far side of the consultation.
Has that been accepted at a ministerial level?
Well, we have put up our submissions, including the full totality of what has been given to us on the review, and ministers have very much supported the way we're developing the strategy.
The intention
Including
is
the transgender involvement in the GAP.
Well, the intention is that there will be an open process to recruit people to the Gender Advisory Panel based on criteria and skills. Now, that detail hasn't been entirely worked through, but in terms of the approach, it's rather than have a very, very large group of very able representatives from a large number of organisations, to have a skills-based panel that will monitor and bring rigour, and there will be a competition around that. So given that applications will be made to that, an assessment will be made in that context. So that's how the process is going to work. What that results in terms of outcome, it wouldn't be appropriate to actually say there'd be somebody specifically who identifies themselves as representing the transgender interests, because it's going to be a competitive process. And I think that applies to public appointments and to promotion competitions and to any areas where we're advancing, that we have to stay within the law, and positive discrimination is not something that is always lawful. And I think we do need to be careful that in ensuring that equality is advanced for one group, it's not at the expense of another group. And in terms of, for example, women in public appointments, again, there is a need to make sure that it's still on merit, and that we're abiding with all the equality legislation. So again, the intention is that the GAP, the Gender Advisory Panel, will be appointed through an open and competitive process, and that's the plan at the minute anyway, and that's the basis on which we're working. But again, who's successful in that, it wouldn't be appropriate to actually say, well, it'll definitely be one group or another, one person or another.
Yeah, but just to add to that, there was no transgender voice on the GAP panel. But there is now transgender voice on the GAP panel. We have 2 organisations that participate in our GAP panel meetings.
And the final question is the timeline then for the full public consultation and agreement on the new strategy.
Right. We had not set out the timeline just yet, because we have literally just finished the review and we have got agreement to move to the new strategy. Where we are at a huge advantage is the fact that we can use a lot of the work that we have to date, including the current sort of first cut drafts, as a way to move forward immediately. So I would see us having a new gender equality strategy in 2014. I know that's not an absolute answer to your question, because it doesn't give you the timeline, but we will advise the committee of what the timeline is as soon as we have that.
Do you see the consultation being over the full 12 weeks as recommended?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Just finally for me, one area where we couldn't say we have succeeded is in the question of equal pay between the genders. How important will that be in a new strategy?
Well, that will be, if that, as you say, it has been identified, it will be an objective. It's an objective in the current strategy as it sits. And as I said earlier on, Chair, we had the Equal Pay Code of Practice was produced earlier in 2013 as part of that initiative. But again, that is something that if we include it in the action plan and we tie up the statistics to measure it, then we'll be able to see how it is progressing or how it is not progressing. But it is already a statistical issue that is looked at.
Yeah, and steps have been made to address it. In the civil service, for example, the pay systems were equalised to remove anomalies and to work to a situation where over time the pay gap was reduced. So again, actions have been taking place, certainly within the gift of the public service. and it is a European priority that we address the equal pay gap. So again, yes, absolutely, that's a key element of any gender equality strategy.
Okay, and I think that just as an observation rather than a question, it's maybe worth just reading into the record recent Assembly research in terms of appointments in public life. Women in terms of MLAs, 19%, High Court judges, 0%, County Court judges, 17.5%, District judges, 22%, public appointments, 33%, chairs of public bodies, 19%, managers, directors and senior officials, 37%. And I think in terms of permanent secretaries, the number is 1, I think.
It might be 0.
I think it might be 0, but we're not 100% sure.
Rosalie Flanagan, decal, no? She's retired, so it's down to 1. It's down to 0 from 1. Could be worse. Right, well,
yeah.
There's a baseline.
Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, and finally, you realise we didn't get your papers until yesterday afternoon, way outside the protocol.
Take note of that.
Patricia, Martina.
Apologies for that.
Okay. Lula, Martina, Patricia, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, I didn't quite get what was that statistic that Megan came out with about school girls, was it, females in the classroom being afraid to ask questions? Did anybody catch?
I think she said 22%, was it?
Were afraid to ask questions because of their perception of how they looked. Wow. Okay, members, it's agenda item 9 next, regeneration of sites. You may recall some months ago we wrote requesting FM and DFM brief the committee on the Maze Long Kesh site. Ministers have indicated there's currently no agreement on the development of MLK, and they are therefore unable to brief the committee at this time. Instead, officials will brief us on the regeneration of the other sites in OFM, DFM's portfolio. Obviously, on political questions with regard to Maze Long Kesh, that's not to be dealt with today. The department's briefing paper is on page 43 of table papers and was received yesterday morning. We welcome to the committee Anne Loughran, Judith Brown, June Wilkinson and Tim Losty. Tim, we've just spoken to colleagues about papers arriving yesterday afternoon. You were slightly ahead, but any reason why you weren't within the protocols?
Chair, we understand that the original request was to talk about MLK as well as the sites, and I think ministers wrote back in relation to that, and we provided this briefing in relation to what we were asked to talk about. So I think we got our information in, I think last Friday.
Friday last week?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I think our request was submitted in September. Okay. Okay. Have you an opening statement? Yeah.
I'm sure. First of all, thanks for the opportunity to come along and talk about the sites. We've had some interesting, very positive developments over recent weeks. So it gives us the opportunity to report on some of the progress there. As I said earlier, I understand that you initially wanted officials to talk about developments at the Maze Long Kesh. Ministers have confirmed that there is no current agreement on the Maze Long Kesh development. They continue to discuss a way forward, and they will be meeting with the board, the Development Corporation, in the very near future. I'll therefore provide a quick overview of developments with some of the other sites, and then hopefully after that I can answer any of your questions. If I start with the Crumlin Road Jail, The jail was transferred to OFMDF in 2003. Since then, we have spent about £50 million in the restoration and renovation work, and also protecting the building as it is a listed building. Since undertaking that restoration work, we've transformed this building into what we consider to be a driver for economic and physical regeneration in North Belfast. The visitor attraction and conference centre, which if members haven't had the opportunity to visit it yet, I would encourage you to do so. It opened in November 2012, and within a year it has hosted over 136,000 visitors, far in excess of its original target, and it's had over 400 corporate, community and political events at the jail, so it is very much a feature of the Belfast tourism scene as well as the Belfast business scene. We're also finalising discussions with another private company, the Belfast Distillery, which intends to open a boutique distillery on A Wing on the jail. Plans are progressing on that. It'll also be a visitor centre, and there'll be cafes and restaurants there. The Visitor Attraction Centre, the organisation running that employs about 30 people. And we expect the boutique distillery to employ upwards of 60 people. So there's 90 jobs in an area of high deprivation, surrounded by at least 4 areas of high deprivation, and also contributes significantly to community relations. As the developments continue on the site, we maintain contact with representatives of the local community. And they're also very heavily involved in some of the decision-making process that we have about the site. We continue to carry out some of the renovation work there. More recently, we completed work on what we refer to as the Warders Cottages, which is on the front of the Crumlin Road. The benefit there is it also helps to transform that part of town. And we have gone out to soft market testing for expressions of interest for the Warders Cottages, for B Wing and for D Wing. That closes this Friday, and we will be assessing those ideas with a view to making recommendations to ministers on future developments at the site. In terms of Ebrington ILEX, the Ebrington Barracks site is managed by ILEX. We received the site again in 2003. There's been a significant amount of site preparation work up there. I think the committee had the opportunity to visit the site last year. It featured very significantly in the City of Culture activities. The square hosted a number of open-air events. And again, it's very much a feature of regeneration in the city. We also spent some £2.4 million on the refurbishment of 2 buildings on the site to create a digital hub. This is in line with the One Plan commitment to create a digital economy in the city. The plans are that it will create up to 50 jobs in the city. The building was used on a temporary basis to host the Turner Prize. A number of local stakeholders and people representing cultural organisations in the city have been talking to ILEX about the possibility of maintaining gallery space at buildings 8081. What we're doing there is we're delaying some of the final refurbishment to allow time for consideration of an examination of the need for a visual arts space in the Northwest, which is a study that will be carried out by the Arts Council and also Derry City Council. It will also allow some of the stakeholders to consider their ideas further. We're also looking at a further 2 buildings coming online at the end of this year, which will meet some of the expressions of interest that have been generated through an interim soft market testing by ILEX. A development framework which, as said in this committee previously, is long overdue, but ILEX are in the final stages of that process, and we expect to be able to provide the committee with information on that development framework within the next few weeks. The other sites that we managed that were gifted to the executive in 2011 following the Hillsborough Agreement were initially intended to be sold on to raise funds for the executive. Some of those sites, in light of the downturn in the property market at that time, and also the Minister's views that the site should maximise the economic, social and regeneration benefits for the local and regional communities, whilst our approach now is still to include disposal of the site, but consideration has also been given to the medium and long-term development issues on those sites. The largest site, and again the committee visited, is Shackleton at Ballykelly, 730-acre site. You'll be aware that approximately 10 acres of the site have been set aside for the proposed relocation of DART headquarters. Over the last number of years, we've been actively engaged in promoting the site to a number of sectors, including the business sector and community sector, as well as meeting with the local council and development organisations. Got to the stage that we were getting a number of expressions of interest, so we believe we generated sufficient interest to be able to go out and test the market more formally for potential uses. So we went out to soft market testing, which closed a few weeks ago, and we received over 40 expressions of interest, and the First Minister gave some information about this on Monday. We're currently going through those expressions of interest, assessing them, and we'll be making recommendations to ministers in the coming weeks as to how we can take forward developments on that site. Our other site, St Patrick's in Ballymena, it's a 37-acre site. Some of the houses that belong to the site but were adjacent to the actual military site we sold for about 2.1 million. The money came in and went to DOJ. We're now working with Department of Social Development and also the local council in terms of a master plan for the site and for that immediate area as to how it can actually meet and address the needs of the community there in the future. Our other site, St Lucia in Omagh, it shares a boundary with Lissanelli, so obviously the development there will play a significant part in what happens with the site. And again, we are working with the local council and with DSD in terms of taking forward a master planning exercise on that site. One of the recommendations from the Northern Ireland Audit Report in the PAC previously as to how we manage the sites was to establish an oversights group. That oversights group was established in late 2012. It continues to meet and it provides us with advice on governance, and also it enables us to provide strategic advice and strategic operational issues to the organisations involved in managing sites, but also to the officials here and to ministers. Chair, that's a very quick overview. I'm happy now to take any questions, and hopefully we'll be able to answer them for the committee.
Okay, Tim, thank you very much indeed. I know George Robinson wants in, but just bear 1 second, George.
Yeah.
You mentioned, Tim, the Crumlin site, and I know you encourage members to go and visit. We actually had a sort of away day, a strategic planning day last September, and my first preference for venue was Crumlin.
Yeah.
Couldn't afford you. And we went to Groundworks because they undercut your costs. So just to say, we would all have visited by now if we could have afforded your fees.
Well, Chair, the Visitor Attraction Centre is run as a commercial enterprise, charging commercial rates. But I will be happy to talk to that company on behalf of the committee. I would like you all to see the very significant work that's taken place there. It is a very positive piece of work carried out by government in an area of deprivation, and I think it has really changed the whole persona of that part of town.
I offer purely as feedback.
I shall see what I can do there.
George Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks to Tim and his team as well for the presentation. Obviously, my focus is on the Shackleton site, and we did visit it maybe over a year ago. And I'm sure everyone saw the great potential down there for such a large site. Over 700, you quite rightly say, over 700 acres. Just 10 acres have been used by the DART relocation, and I know the First Minister did give answers to questions from a colleague, Gregory Campbell, the other day in a question time. How do you see the rest of the site developing? I know there has been about 40 expressions of interest, and amongst that, is there a museum planned for? Is there an expression of interest from a museum or for a museum? And from the Dard relocation, will they be using existing buildings or will they new build? So that's a couple of things so far.
Okay. Dard are preparing their business case, and in that business case it includes options looking at new build and also use of existing buildings. So the business case and the figures will point them in a direction what they have to do there. There is a significant number of buildings on what we refer to as the upper camp, the top camp. Some of those buildings we believe have potential that they can be used. Other buildings we think probably not, and actions will be taken there. In terms of how we see the site going forward, it is about getting the balance between reimbursement to the executive, disposal of the site at a profit, but also balancing that with meeting economic needs. We want to see the site being a job creator, so we will look to see what will create the most jobs for people in that area, and also match the skills and the future training. We would also anticipate some element of community use in there. We've had a number of meetings with community organisations. Yep. So it's about getting that balance right. It's not simply about flipping the land where a developer may sit on it and simply use it for commercial purposes. It has to have that balance. And when we assess the various proposals, we'll be putting forward recommendations. We'll also be talking to other experts on the development of similar sites with regard to those recommendations. And whenever we get to narrowing those recommendations down, and ministers have agreed, we will also be going out to consult with the local community to make sure that the development of the site is being taken forward where it does meet needs.
Just a couple of points. One is in relation to decontamination. Is there any decontamination issues with the site presently?
There will be decontamination issues whenever we start to negotiate with the various organisations who may come onto the site. It depends on the use of that part of the site. Also, that will then dictate to us the level of decontamination that may be required. What I would want to emphasise is there isn't contaminants all over the site. The contaminants on the site would be what would be usually expected of a site like this. We have experience of decontamination work in Ebrington and Mayslow and Kesh. We've already received a number of surveys from the MOD whenever we received the site, and we had CPD doing some additional work on that. So one of our next moves will be to look into the contaminants in more detail so that we can accurately cost how we decontaminate the site. And as I say, it may be that you carry out the decontamination at different levels depending on what will go on to different parts of that site.
And I'm sure you'd agree with myself and with the First Minister's answer that from the Northwest point of view, this will be a hub, of economic activity, hopefully in the future. And when would you envisage seeing the site up and running again? I know that's a hard question, but even an estimate.
Well, the whole development of the site may take some years, depending on what goes on. But we're moving into a period of time when we'll be looking at another year programme for government, and then moving into the next CSR period. So we would hope to be putting in bids under the next CSR period that will allow us to complete the majority of work that may be required on the site, if indeed we are required to fund that, and that will depend on negotiations with the organisations that have expressed interest there. I would say to you, we would hope that this would be done a lot sooner rather than later. One of the key components of the site is the relocation of the Dart headquarters, which the programme for government is scheduled for 2016, and that will create a lot of leverage also on what happens on the site. So we would hope to have decisions certainly in the next couple of years as to what will be on that site, and to have a lot of that work underway.
One other point, just sorry, Chair for Hagen, is the new pumping station. I think that will be very welcome, particularly from the local farmers, adjoining farmers. And that, as far as I'm concerned, is very, very welcome and long overdue as well.
Yeah, the pumping station and also the drainage on our site, it helps to keep the adjacent farms clear of water as well. So it's not just us keeping Shackleton clear. So it's important to us in terms of good neighbourly relations as well as contributing to the local economy that we committed to that work. The new pumps are working. We've got a warning system. It's working, although in this weather, touch wood, they continue to work, but we have a lot of plan Bs there in case something does happen.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Chair.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thanks, Tom.
What's the cost of the pumping, Tim, and do you provide the service to farmers just as a good neighbourly gesture, or do you try and claw back any of the revenue?
We meet the costs at the moment. When we took over the site, the MOD would have maintained the pumping stations to a certain degree. We took over the site, we took over the pumps, and we agreed that we would continue to keep Shackleton and the neighbouring lands, try to keep them free of flood water. The actual cost of the pump?
Well, the full maintenance costs would be. The full maintenance costs for a year would be in and around £250,000, but that's not just about the pumping station, although the pumping station would be a significant element of that.
Okay, thank you. Jimmy Spratt.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Tim, for the presentation and team. Maybe if I can go back to Ballykelly, not really for the reasons that George has been there, but just in Ballykelly in particular, I see a term that gives me some concern. And I'm wondering if you have a definition for it, Tim, because it's cropped up in major procurement processes, such as in my own committee DRD in relation to TransLink. And there's this soft testing the market. What's your definition of soft testing?
I suppose soft testing is we might have ideas as to how this site might be used, but we need to actually test and see whether there is interest in the market in developing or putting something onto a site. So it's really us going to the market to get expressions of interest. What do local organisations and businesses and also organisations with experience of developing sites, what do they think it could be used for? And then we get that information in, we assess it and see whether it also matches what the Minister's objectives may be for the site.
I know it's slightly different in your case, but do you think that's a good idea in major government procurement processes?
I suppose I would have to say I would leave the answer to that question up to the experts in procurement, but it does also depend on what the nature of the contract or the procurement is that you're looking for. In our case, we have almost a blank sheet, so we're looking for those interests. We're looking for people to come back to us with ideas, so it suits us in these circumstances to take it forward that way.
Well, would you agree with me that it could create an unbalanced situation in terms of maybe somebody else that might have an interest in a procurement or a government process, or in fact a process where there's land building available?
Again, I need to be careful that I don't commit myself to something that the experts would know more about, but in our case, if there was an agreed use of the site, that might dictate going out to certain sectors who have expertise in that particular use, but that would require agreement at the outset before we went to the market.
Well, given, I mean, I think a lot of praise needs to go to the department in terms of some of the sites that have already been developed, and you've mentioned those, and I'll go over them again. But in relation to the Ballykelly site again, and the fact that DARD are programmed for 2016, and I think the First Minister indicated the other day there was about 40 expressions of interest in relation to the Ballykelly site, Shackleton. In terms of that, are you aware of any discussions that might have taken place with, given that this site could be a very, well, there could be quite a number of, let's face it, if there's 40 expressions of interest, there could be quite a number of other departments, employees and all the rest of it going into it on the basis of DARD going there. Has there been any discussions with Northern Ireland Rail or the Department of Regional Development in relation to a possible train stop there on that site? I mean, obviously that would be greatly beneficial to workers that might be travelling up and down there.
Yeah. OFM DFM has talked to DRD about the railway and a possible halt, and DARD are also talking to them. I suppose there's a need for certain evidence to be produced to allow DRD to consider any decisions that they may take in relation to the rail track and the halt there. But certainly we see the railway coming through the site as potentially a big advantage in the future in terms of what else will go onto our site. So we will continue to keep those discussions going with DRD.
And suppose in relation to all of the sites, the knock-on silver line into the thing is that in fact other buildings that may be commercially pretty useful in terms of maybe sell-off eventually, government offices in relation to DARD, in relation to maybe other departments that might go to some of the other sites in the future. So there may well be a payback to the public purse in terms of some of those sites being sold off, which may be financially fairly lucrative in terms of maybe commercial sites or whatever.
We also have a responsibility for sponsorship of the Assets Management Unit, which in their responsibility is looking at the government estate and looking at government assets and putting together a plan and strategy as to how some of those assets could be disposed, generating income for the executive. So that work continues. We've had some success with that in terms of St Patrick's and the disposal of houses there. So, you know, we'll continue with that work. With the military sites, former military sites that we've received, we'll also be looking to maximise the value, but then also in consultation with local community and businesses, see what else we can put in there that's going to have a long-term benefit for that community. So we're going for the balance. The other assets, some of the other assets will be disposed of at a profit. And also, if we can put public sector services onto some of our sites, some of our land, that also means you don't have to pay money outside. So one of the things that we're looking at with Ballykelly is going back to the public sector to see if there are any interests in locating public sector services, on the St Patrick site.
I mean, there was some criticisms in the past, particularly whenever the sites were taken over and then we had the economic downturn, and there was some criticisms from certain quarters in relation to OFM, DFM ministers holding on to the sites and saying, well, we want to wait until the commercial results might be better. Well, we're now approaching that position, and given what you've just told me in relation to other commercial sites as well, in actual fact there could be payback to the public purse in relation to all of these things, and it was a right decision and proper decision to make at the time.
Well, I think when Ballykelly first went out to the market, there were only 3 offers, I think, or 3 potential uses were registered. Now There's over 40. Now, not all those 40 will be viable. We still have to go through that. And it is partly due to change in the market. Also, partly due to the fact that when ministers looked at the site, and as I'm sure the committee did, when you go in and you look at Ballykelly, you can't help but think there's potential benefits from a site like this. So ministers are able to look at the potential economic, social regeneration benefits of the site, as well as just the financial implications of it. So, you know, things are looking very, very positive now.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Chair.
No problem. Deputy Chair, Chris Wood.
Thanks, Chair. Just in reference to Shackleton, Tim, the maintenance cost to date are in the region of £1.5 million to the taxpayer. What's your analysis of that cost vis-à-vis the potential benefits that could be accrued on the site?
Well, the potential benefits are one, you know, we'd be looking to recoup the money that we have already invested on the site, and then also we need to look at what does the local community need. There's a need for jobs. There's a need for businesses, sustainable businesses that are going to stay there. Also a need for something that's going to bring people and money into the area, so that it does start to create that vibrancy. So in terms of how we assess whether or not we get a return on the investment, it's not simply the profit motive. We will be seeking to recover our costs, but then what are the other benefits in the community which have to be factored into that?
So it's not an investment that negates the value that can be gained from the site further down the line?
No. Going back to the issue of the pumps, you know, if we hadn't spent resources on keeping those pumps active, there would be devastation in the local farmers. We also we have a wastewater treatment that comes through Shackleton, which looks after Ballykelly village, and again, if we weren't spending money on the maintenance, that again could cause problems and flooding, and you know, we're seeing a whole lot of things in the news at the moment, so we can see where the benefits of that have been.
Thanks, Chair. I have been in Crumlin Road Jail, by the way, with the social investment programme, and it is a positive project for the area. Can I ask how exactly the site will be accessible to local people in there, or in what way it's being used to engage with the surrounding area as well as other
Shackleton
types of
or
Crumlin Road Jail?
Crumlin Road. We have a community engagement forum. We meet with representatives on a regular basis. We also have a community outreach where there's special consideration in terms of cost and things like that for local community groups who may want to avail of it.
Just not Mike. Just not Mike.
Just a guardian of our budget.
Local people are employed as guides and working in the facility. We've had social clauses built into a lot of the contracts there. We spent a lot of time talking to the communities before we committed to the restoration work, and maintaining community support is very important. And in fact, the two businesses that are on site meet with us when we meet with the local community organisations. And in terms of future employment and training and things like that, they do work very closely on it. So the community support, it also helps to create community ownership in the area. And there's a lot of other projects that we hope will start to appear on the site in future years. So I think it's a very positive development in that part of town.
The City of Culture events at Aberdeen were fantastic as well, on a positive note. Thanks, Chair.
No problem. Tim, who owns the tunnel under the Crumlin?
The tunnel belongs to us until it gets across the Crumlin Road, and then there's a door.
Yes.
And that then leads into the courthouse, which is under private ownership at this point in time.
But isn't DSD scoping?
DSD carried out an exercise looking at potential uses and benefits of the courthouse. A lot of people are very, very interested in what happens to that courthouse. And I think the fact that you go up the road now, you see what's happened with the jail and you look across and you see the courthouse. And we really do want something done there.
Good. Good. Brenda Hill.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies for early arrival from London this afternoon.
No problem.
Tim, you mentioned in regards to Ebrington Barracks, you threw in a comment there that there's hope there might be maintaining the gallery space where a very successful Turner Prize was held. Have there been discussions initiated with maybe Decal or other potential partners to build on this idea, or is it just an idea that's out there in the ether?
The Turner Prize, from our perspective, was always meant to be temporary in those buildings. The buildings 80 and 81 were finished to a very high standard to be able to attract and develop digital and creative businesses. And as such, the building lent themselves to an exhibition such as the Turner Prize. We had agreed to spend the money on buildings 80-81 because of the demonstration of need through the One Plan and the need for a digital economy. Also, the businesses that would go into that site would be a legacy from the City of Culture programme. It was only towards the end of the Turner Prize, and I think the fact that the whole City of Culture, the programmes have been very successful and raised aspirations of the local community and the local stakeholders, that people started to talk about trying to get or maintain a gallery in the Northwest. Now, we're not experts on the need for gallery space, visual gallery space. The Arts Council and Derry City Council will be looking at that. But what we felt was fair was to delay the final renovation work to allow those local stakeholders to talk to partners such as Decal, Derry City Council and others as to the potential for that type of gallery space, because there are already a number of galleries in the city and you don't want to displace work from there. The costs of running it and the potential for a gallery in the area to house the type of exhibitions that would bring people, money and jobs to the city. So we're allowing that people to have those discussions.
Interesting. I look forward to hearing the outcomes if it ever happens. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Alex Atwood.
Yes, just some specific questions then in respect of a number of the sites. I seem to remember that in the week that's in it especially, that the flooding risk at Ballykelly on the lower side was, well, obviously it's ongoing risk.
Yeah.
Station confirms that. But is that a manageable issue long term? Or is it actually going to be the issue that prejudices the potential of the site in terms of its future development?
Well, when we went out to the market to get expressions of interest, we went out with the whole site, the top camp and the bottom camp. People are aware that it was built on the land was reclaimed, it was floodplain, but we're managing the pumps. They're working. Some people, some organisations in the past had come to us with ideas to let the land flood, let it become a wetland, maybe a visitors' centre or a visitors' attraction. And there's always options there. But we're primarily looking at how we can use the totality of that site for the benefits of the community. We then have to weigh that with the costs to keep it flood-free. At the moment, it's working. We spent the money on new pumps. We spent the money on drainage. We'll be sharing some of the costs in the future with some of the other appropriate authorities. And also, as projects start to come on the site, the costs of maintaining pumps and keeping the area flood-free will be spread. So it will be more cost-effective, more economical to keep that going. I suppose the reason why I'm not saying a definite yes is you never know with this sort of weather and the impacts that it has. But 2 years ago, there's some very bad floods up there, and now, in spite of all this, we're keeping it reasonably dry.
In terms of the proposed relocation of Dard, which I and my party support to Ballykelly, is there what is the scale of decontamination costs in respect to the site, that part of the site that is subject to the Dard relocation?
We don't have actual costs of that yet because it will depend on the type of building, whether it's new build or whether it's used as some of the existing build. There will be some decontamination costs, and there will also be some clearing away of buildings. That part of the site, because that was used for living quarters previously, we anticipate that the sort of contaminants we would have to manage would be things like asbestos in old buildings. So we know how to do that. We don't anticipate that the costs of decontamination there would be excessive.
Have you done an assessment of what the decontamination cost might be? Asbestos or other related? We've give that definitive answer.
We've had 2 reports. We've had CPD going in there. We've also recently had some people having a look at it. So we don't have definitive costs at this stage, but
we're moving to the next stage where we're planning to commission an asbestos survey. Now that Dard have narrowed down where they'd like to be, we're in a position then to look at that in more detail, assess the asbestos survey costs.
But you don't think there's ground contamination, given there would have been so many heavy vehicles and so on and so forth, and that oil would have gone into the soil and into the hopefully not into the watercourses, but certainly into the.
If there's oil contaminants, it's most likely things like domestic heating oil. The oil from the heavy equipment, the machinery and the planes would be, if it is, down at the lower camp.
2 questions about then Ebrington. Is there not a tension between the ambition and the development of the units at Ebrington as a digital hub, or to attract digital industry, with the view of those who support the expansion of Magee, that if you don't have an expansion of Magee, there's further proposals in that regard this week, that if you don't have an expansion for Magee, you don't have the regeneration of Derry generally, and that at the heart of the expansion of Magee has to be graduate and undergraduate digital IT opportunities. So here we have on one side of the river the ambition to develop digital industry, and on the other side of the river we don't have the expansion of the university, which is at the heart of the regeneration of the city generally, and which is necessary in particular to create digital opportunities in the city, because the graduates would be coming out trained in IT and digital. Is not a tension, and is the government not joined up when on one side of the river it says here's this opportunity, yet it is not growing the indigenous talent that would then bring in the industries to exploit the opportunity?
Well, if I answered in relation to the demonstration need and the business case that we looked at for the digital hub, we talked to not just the university but the local college in relation to some of the courses that people were doing. So we do see some of the digital businesses and creative businesses as not necessarily requiring graduate skills or graduate experience. So there's a number of courses available up in the Northwest that we will be able to tap into and get entrepreneurs from those. As I say, we've talked to the university. We also we sponsored 2 international conferences in the city last year, one by OECD and another one by the European Business Information Network, and we spoke to some of the experts in digital business there in terms of how we could create this digital and creative business cluster. So we do believe we're on the right track. And also, fortunately, the new chair of ILEX was responsible for managing a digital hub in Dublin. So, whilst it wasn't intended that way, we now have access to his experience and expertise as to how we can fill this centre.
And all that's strong and good. But if you speak to the advocates for the expansion of the university, they say that without the expansion of the university by 9,200 undergraduates, and that a big element of that is digital IT undergraduate courses, we're not going to be able to have the scale in the Northwest generally to attract in the digital businesses. So yeah, there may well be some good courses at a HE level that may service the needs of some digital opportunities, but not of the scale that will see digital industry grow in that part of the North, unless you have the McGee opportunity grasped. So I'm just pointing out, you're going to try to market with the new chair of ILEX and other ways the digital opportunities that might be at Ebrington, but without really breaching the glass ceiling. By going full scale, you're going to have this tension between a bit of digital, hopefully at Ebrington, but without the scale of digital opportunity being exploited in the Northwest generally, because the McGee situation is unresolved. And I think that is an issue that FM and DFM have a strategic role and a role in respect to Ebrington. And given the endorsement of the one plan, which said there should be 7,000 expansion in McGee, that's what FM and DFM said when that report was launched. That's what I said when that report was launched. There should be an expansion of 7,000 undergraduate in McGee. So far, there's been 500.
Well, OFM DFM also has responsibility for chairing the interdepartmental group on the one plan, so Dell are represented on that, and I'll share your comments with the Dell representative at that next meeting next week.
So, two very brief questions then. Do I draw the conclusion from what you said that it is the intention of FM and DFM that ILEX is going to continue for longer than some of us think it should? To be honest, that's a leap forward. What we are looking at is we have a physical site that needs to be regenerated. There will be a review of ILEX, which will be initiated this year. We will await the outcome of that review. The review will have to look at what has to be done, what skills are required, and what else is happening in the operating environment. So that review commences and finishes when? It's due to take place early 2014, and that will also include the views of people in ILEX, people in the city. This is early 2014? Yeah. So when is it due to start? Financial year. Financial year. And you couldn't send us a note about what is the social clauses model that you've been deploying in respect of Ebrington? Yeah. Because if it is the DFP model, it's a pretty weak model. Whereas if you adopt the DSD model, it's quite strong. Not as strong as it should be by any means, but it's stronger. And that's it. And even outside of the contracts, the organisations, ILEX and our organisations in Crumlin Jail see the benefit of engaging with the local community. So very often they will go beyond what's in a contract to see what else they can do in the community by way of both creating jobs, social responsibility, and trying to give something back to the community. But we will write back to the committee on that issue. Leslie Cree.
Two quickies for Tim. Tim, whatever happened to the site at Malone, and what's the current situation at Girdwood?
Girdwood comes under the responsibility of the Department of Social Development. DSD have a strategic advisory forum, and we would be members of that. So we would be involved in discussions with them about Girdwood and how it would impact on the jail and vice versa. And it also includes consideration of issues such as the future feasibilities of anything in the courthouse, and then also the University of Ulster moving into that part of town. So there are ongoing discussions. I understand that there's a number of developments with Girdwood, but it's DSD's responsibility. And again, through our liaison there, I'll make colleagues in DSD aware of your interest and hopefully get you something. The site in Malone, that site was sold when it initially came to us, and the money that was generated was then used within the executive to fund some of the programme for government commitments.
So it was, do you remember if it was sold for housing or
housing?
What happened?
Yeah,
was it?
I believe there are housing.
Thanks, Tim.
Okay, Tim, one last thing, and I... George.
Small supplementary.
Yes, of course.
Sorry.
As long as it's not Lima Valley.
It better be.
It's not about Valley.
Relation to
I have a
Shackleton.
fiver on it behind Lima Valley.
In relation to Shackleton again, depending on the projects, will there be any planning considerations
There will be, yeah.
for the site?
Yeah. And it depends on what goes on
Depending
it
on
and
the
then
projects.
what we need to put onto the site to facilitate that, and also the impact on local communities, so there will be planning.
And the last one was a museum, one of the considerations. Maybe it's too sensitive.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, George. So, yeah, Tim,
Appreciate that.
No problem.
I understand, the committee understands we cannot scrutinise the plans for the future of Maze Long Cash because there is no political agreement, and that's taken as read. There is one area where I think we have legitimately the right to ask a question, and it is with regard to the fact that for over 6 months now the taxpayer has been funding an arm's length body without any knowledge or any scrutiny of its activities. So could I ask the specific question, what activities, if any, have been undertaken in the last 6 months by the Maze Long Cash Development Board?
Sorry, sir, that was what activities?
Do you know what activities, if any,
Yeah.
have been undertaken by the MLK Development Board over the last 6 months?
Yeah. Well, the Maze Long Cash Development Corporation, it's a responsible organisation. It does operate to its financial memorandum, and a number of people that it employed, that it used, were secondees who are no longer there working on projects, but the corporation is completing some of the work that it had started in terms of health and safety, site preparation, things like that. They've also been involved in the negotiations with the RUAS in terms of the next show. So they've been completing a lot of that work, and completing some work that they were engaged in terms of preparation for business cases. The ministers will be meeting with the Development Corporation very shortly, and those issues will be discussed.
Okay, yeah, I noted you mentioned that the meeting was forthcoming. So you could characterise it as it is withdrawn to sort of minimal operational level?
In terms of the work that they're involved in now, I wouldn't want to say minimal without having that discussion with the Development Corporation, but we have had discussions with the Chair and with the Chief Executive about the current situation, and as I said, it's a responsible organisation, responsible board.
Secondees have returned to their parent organisations. The Programme for Government Milestone, the commencement of site infrastructure works, therefore, is not progressing as planned currently.
Well, Chair, the only thing that I can say to you in relation to our overall programme for government commitments and the targets is that ministers have not agreed on the future direction of the site, but they continue to discuss, and we await their instruction.
Sure. Okay. Anne, June, Judith and Tim, thank you very much indeed. Appreciate it.
And I'll make those phone calls.
I'm not asking for preferential treatment.
No,
let it not be said that we're looking at discount.
I think it's something, it's a project that we would really like the committee to see. So we'll work on that.
But if it's the marketing budget, maybe there's a compromise. Eh?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Leslie. So that completes the oral sessions, members. Our final issue is agenda item 10, which is a written briefing. It's come from the Department on the Barroso Task Force Desk Officers Quarterly Report covering October to December 2013. In your electronic packs, we start at page 149. Progress is updated on the thematic priorities: competitiveness and employment, innovation and technology, climate change and energy, and social cohesion. Can I pause and invite comment from members? In the absence of which, are we content to forward the update to statutory committees?
Agreed.
Thank you very much, members. Page 185 is a copy of the Forward Work Programme. I would just ask you to note that we had scheduled a departmental briefing on goods, facilities and services legislation for next week.
Cancelled?
Not cancelled, but very unlikely to happen.
Sorry, Chair, could I might have covered it before I came in, and I apologise for being a little late. Have you had your meeting with the head of the civil service?
No. 18th is the earliest it can be brought forward. So it's 9 o'clock on Tuesday the 18th. Far from ideal, but...
Well, I do think the head of the civil service should have cleared his diary. The committee of this House wants to summon somebody as senior as the head of the civil service, and then it is derailed, to put it mildly. I think the head of the civil service should clear his diary.
Well, I cannot comment on what else is in his diary, Alex. But I think the 18th is a long wait, let me put it that way, when we have compromised and accepted his proposal of an informal meeting ahead of coming to committee. I would also fill you in on the fact that I had asked for a briefing on Social Investment Fund, given the announcement this week. The official was not available today, has offered himself in a fortnight's time because he has a previous diary engagement next Wednesday. I don't think that's acceptable. I think he should come here next Wednesday because I consider this committee to be the principal stakeholder. So we will contact the official accordingly.
The 9 o'clock next Wednesday is the meeting, is that right?
Tuesday. So we'll be able to report next Wednesday. But
when did they have the civil service write back, or FMDFM write back saying this was the initial option?
I think it was pretty prompt.
Well, and it was within that week.
Yeah.
Well, I had the correspondence last week.
Mm-hmm.
And when was the head of the civil service advised that that proposal was acceptable to meet?
Straight after the meeting last week.
And the head of the civil service said that the earliest he could meet was 2 weeks away.
No, I think there might have been a date that didn't suit either Chris or myself in between.
It was the Friday or Monday or Tuesday. They clashed with the
all right, okay. I think there could have been. Yeah, I think this is not the first date that he offered. In fact,
right, okay.
So. Any other business members? And just with a reminder that we have our debate on our Delivering Social Change event on Monday at 12:03, and our next meeting is next Wednesday 2 p.m. room 30. Thank you very much.